Hello and welcome. Welcome everyone to NASCA's virtual series. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome. Everyone's kind of joining in. If you're just now joining in, please log in and let us know where you're joining from. We are really excited for another one of what we're calling NASCA TV, our top 10 virtual series, where every month we're diving into another topic around our top 10. Last month, we talked about implicit bias, really talking about DEI in the workforce. And this month, we're talking about a different top 10 topic, workspace and build space optimization and reduction. We have an awesome group of panelists today, as well as people joining us from our sister associations. So here in just a second, I will introduce them, but I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining us. We have these live sessions every month, as well as a recorded session where you can go back and really do a deep dive on each topic and learn from a state about what they're doing around the top 10. I see we have several that just joined us, so if you just joined us, make sure to drop your name or hello in the chat. Let us know what state you're coming from or what association you're coming from. We're really excited to kick off here and hear from so many people. All right. So it looks like we have everyone in. I want to say welcome everyone. This is NASCA's top 10 virtual series. We're really excited to kick off. As I mentioned today, what we're talking about is one of our top 10 items, workspace optimization and reduction. This is going to be led by a discussion from Christy Branscombe in Tennessee, our NASCA Vice President, as well as our Vice President is in charge of our relationship with our strategic partners, our sister associations in the departments of administration that do similar types of work. We're really excited on the call today to have representatives from both NASCA, the National Association of State Facility Administrators. We have Hope Davis, who's also with the state of Massachusetts, as well as I want to thank Marcia Stone, their executive director, who's on the line representing the NASCA. We also have Franklin Plastow, who is with Washington, representing the National Association of State Personnel Executives. It's always great to work with them, as well as their executive director. We have Leslie on the line. We also today will have Herman Bowles that will be representing the private sector perspective. He is really a thought leader from JLL. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Christy Branscombe, the Commissioner of General Services for the state of Tennessee. They've been doing a lot around this work of how personnel, facilities, how workspaces and workplaces all work together in a collaborative strategic vision. So with that, Christy, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about the Tennessee story and start the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for all the strategic partners. We're really happy to have everyone here today. This is my first time hosting as NASCA's VP, so please be gentle with your reviews. But I'm excited about doing it. And for those of you who know me, you guys know that this is what my favorite topic to talk about is real estate. I have worked in real estate development my entire life and construction and done leasing and brokerage and just all kinds of things related to real estate. So I'm, as I said, I'm really excited to be here. It's a little frightening to think it's been 30 years, but it has. So some of you may know a little bit about the state of Tennessee real estate story, but I think it'd be good to let you know that Tennessee is really being recognized as being at the forefront of real estate strategies and initiatives, and we have been for years now. The Tennessee transformation really started with Governor Bill Haslam in 2012, and actually the year before that, they initiated, as soon as he arrived, a group called the State of Tennessee Real Estate Asset Management Group, and that's called, it's STREAM is the acronym, because of course you have to have acronyms in government, but STREAM is really responsible for the centralized activities of everything we do in state government and real estate, and they are a part of our Department of General Services. So the state then partnered with Jones Lang LaSalle, or JLL as they're commonly known, to manage our properties, our facilities management, and our maintenance, and it's been a great relationship for several years now. In fact, we just extended that contract last week for another year. So having professional property management and maintenance has improved the conditions of our buildings dramatically. I can tell you that for sure. And our tenant satisfaction is at an all-time high. Two more things I think would be interesting to mention about Tennessee. We began implementing what we call alternative workplace solutions back in 2015. It's a program that allows our staff to work from where they can best serve their customers and constituents. This could be working from home, it could be working on the job site, or just working mobile. And our office space in our buildings is free address space for the most part, meaning there's no assigned offices. So this means our office interiors have certainly changed to accommodate the working style. And since instituting AWS, we've actually been able to reduce our square footage across our general government portfolio by 1 million square feet. So that's something I think we'll probably talk about today, especially considering how the office space may change in the future post-COVID. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the state of Tennessee also just finished our state of Tennessee master plan for all our general government assets, real estate assets. And we're just beginning to implement the first few steps of our real estate master plan. But we do think that within the next 5 years, we'll be able to reduce another 1 million square feet out of our real estate master plan. The objective there is just to get our properties in as highest best use as we possibly can, and to keep those buildings that are core to our long-term real estate master plan and take care of them, and to get out of leases that we're in currently. So that's a little bit about what we do, and I think we'll start now with questions, and I'll be happy to start those out. We'll hear from some of our panelists. So let's start with the first one. I think the first question is really just, if you would introduce yourself, and maybe we can start with Franklin. Introduce yourself and give us a high-level version of your top priorities for 2021.
Good morning or afternoon. My name is Franklin Plaistow. I am the Assistant Director for State Human Resources and also have the pleasure of serving as the President for the National Association of State Personnel Executives. Thank you to NASCA for convening these meetings. I know the top 10 list is very impressive, and always appreciate the opportunity to join your organization and those on the call to share what we're working on and also learn from you all. Also, Christy, congratulations on the great work in Tennessee. That's really impressive. I know Juan and Leslie and the HR side of the house are folks I often call in Tennessee for advice and consultation. So congratulations on the great work you're doing out there. Just speaking quickly to some of the priorities from the National Association of State Personnel Executive perspective, we do continue to look for, obviously we're looking for ways that we can continue to meaningfully address resources and impacts for those we all have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. One area of particular interest we're looking at right now, and have asked for even some of our corporate partners to help us with, is looking at how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted working families, and particularly working women in our workplace. We know nationally a conversation is happening around how this is impacting. This is definitely, we're seeing a K-shaped recovery for many people. Some have gone through this pandemic and even come out in a better place, and other parts of our workforce are really struggling, and families are struggling. And our role as employers, as often leading employers in our states, we know this is an area that we want to be looking at. Second, just how we can look towards remaining competitive in our labor markets. We already had a bit of a hole to work out of sometimes, and knowing that our compensation wasn't in line with some of our competitors in key industries. This has been compounded now that we've seen our organizations come out of and go through COVID-19 with innovation. So now we see a labor market where there's increased worker flexibility, increased schedule, and even workplace flexibility, and how we as organizations need to remain competitive and stay on top of that. And again, while we're already kind of sometimes at a deficit in that space. We also just looking at how we can even think about employee engagement in this new work environment that we know going forward. I think we all know that a year ago, well, maybe a year and a week plus ago for some of us, it's never going to be like February 15th, 2020 again. That's never going to be the world that we have. And even though there's days we want to go back to that, we deep down know that it's not going to happen. And in some ways, that's an opportunity for us about how we can move forward in that, but also thinking about how we keep things like employee engagement and connection to work, which we know are key drivers of people's satisfaction and why they stay with us in our organizations, how we can tackle that issue. And then finally, and importantly, what we can do about our workplace and our workforce to make sure it's representative of those that we serve, and that we have a work environment that embraces and advances issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and attacks systems of inequity and oppression that impact our workers. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that sounds like everything we've been talking about. So all great topics. Hope, what about you? If you could introduce your association and give a high-level version of what you're thinking about for 2021.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for inviting NASFA to participate in this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also going to say that we've had Tennessee present its STREAM program at one of our national conferences. So it's always good to hear from you guys, because you were doing this before it was, the thing to do. So it's really good to see some results already. NASFA is kind of it's a broad spectrum organization as far as what we cover. We cover facilities, operations, and maintenance issues. We cover architectural and engineering and design type issues. And we also handle discussions and experts from our membership on real estate and leasing matters with regard to state facilities. So basically, we're many people are working on the strategies part, then we have to kind of make sure it gets executed and properly implemented at the facility and the site level for all of our, whether they be our own workers, other state employees, the visitors who are coming into our buildings. So we really have a lot of connections with COVID and how space is being redefined for our workers and our visitors. Our key priorities kind of fit within those areas. Basically on the facility, on the operations and maintenance side, making sure our buildings are safe for everybody, both in terms of cleaning protocols with respect to COVID, and the elevators occupancy levels set appropriately given the concerns for people in social distancing. We're looking at security issues, making sure that it's safe for visitors coming in, also make sure we know who's in our buildings, when and where they are. And incidentally, not respect to COVID, but even just security of our state capitals, making sure that we secure that operation. We're also working a lot on the whole space planning piece, making sure that as we start reducing our leased footprint, like everyone's talking about doing, and moving into public buildings, how do we handle things like shared spaces? Do we need every office and every agent have its own conference room, or can we have kind of shared opportunities that we can be more sensible about? So there's a lot of different issues like that we're covering, and I would say COVID has given us a great opportunity to rethink how we're doing things. And I just want to mention the other issue is energy efficiency and energy use. That's the other issue that kind of affects us, in that people think that our buildings have been kind of low use, so therefore our costs have gone down, but they really haven't. Between ventilation and other services and requirements, that's still a high priority issue for us. It's a good start.
Great, thank you. So both of you kind of touched on this already, but just to see if there's anything else in there. So what do you expect to change? How do you expect things to change in the future regarding the office space? Just again, at a high level, you guys play a role in real estate, obviously to some degree, but how do you expect that role to change? I'll start with you, Franklin.
Christy, and I think Hope really covered some great points that I think actually drive home, I think, what many of our member organizations have shared, which is that we have seen this opportunity. COVID, of course, has had devastating impacts on all of us in many ways, and some deeper than others. And also through this, many of our organizations have shared how they built stronger connections with our colleagues in facilities and real estate and land and planning. And I do want to comment, of course, our state personnel executive organization can have a variety of responsibilities. Like many of you, I'm sure your roles and your time away from this call can be different than some of your peers in other states. So there's varying degrees of engagement, but I think universally, we have seen that HR has become a closer partner of thinking about how we reopen offices safely. So the immediate plan of and Hope nicely talked to it about cleaning protocols and ventilation. And there were things that HR kind of didn't probably have the opportunity to engage as much in. I know for many of our states where we have a very understandably a responsibility to respond to our employees, all of us do, and sometimes have added factors like labor organizations that will want to make sure we're thinking about those things, that it became a new way for us to kind of engage in those conversations. And I will confess for myself, build greater awareness. So kind of opening up some of those silos that I think we saw in organizations, and other organizations have shared that, or other states have shared that as well. I think in looking towards the future, a big part of it for us is we know that we're going to have employees who may never come back to an office that's their office anymore. The future will be they work remotely and come into the office from time to time, and perhaps for some employees may never come into the office. So what are ways that we do build, at least for an infrastructure, both on the technology side and on the physical side? How do we look at some of the office spaces we've used before to build more collaboration areas, more meeting spaces than maybe we had before? And so thinking carefully about what our facilities look like in terms of design is a really big task, and I think a task that's a bit uncertain right now. I noticed even as we talk about it as organizations, we run into this dynamic of we want more open spaces, but also we have to make sure we're following protocols for reopening. So there's this inherent tension of safety, and then also like what the modern work environment looks like in this new environment. And I know that's probably something that many on this call probably have to navigate day in, day out right now. But again, I think a key one for the future is just the moving away from dedicated office space and more to what a shared office model looks like, and collaboration spots that I think states are in varying spaces of where they are on that. And so that's a definite area that we see high collaboration with facilities and real estate, and also how we can even scale down some offices. So, but I'll stop and give back to Hope there.
Yeah. So yes, we're doing the same thing in Tennessee. We had already been moving in that direction with AWS, of course, but yeah, we're going to be taking the office space interiors to the next generation of whatever that is that it looks like. And kind of the same things you guys are thinking as well. Hope, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Well, I would just add that our NASCA's Committee on Real Estate and Leasing has never been more active and had more engaged members than we've had in the last year or so. We've had a number of different conference calls or group conversations, and they've been very well attended, as you can understand. I will say we're also working on in Massachusetts, new space standards, because we are moving from addressable spaces. We are going to have minimal assigned desks, and we really are, when we kind of are figuring out what the floor plan is going to look like for a particular space, it's really ratio of closed offices versus huddle rooms versus conference rooms versus workstations, and doing a lot of analytics to figure out what makes the most sense for the operation. And generally, the idea is if people are working on individual tasks or with only one other person, the expectation is those people will continue to work from their alternative location than coming into the office. However, and this is probably more of a personnel issue also, but making sure that those people who don't have an extra bedroom or are sharing a kitchen table with 3 other roommates or are dealing with childcare and elder care maybe do need to come to the office, even if their work is not within that confines of collaboration. But so it's sort of some certain standards with a lot of flexibility on the edges.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's all about flexibility, right? Trying to adapt to what's happening in the market, and it's hard to know. So anyway, before I introduce the next person and we ask the next question, I have to say I'm a little biased towards this person. It's Herman Bowles with JLL. As I mentioned, JLL's had a long-term relationship with the state of Tennessee, and Herman and his team have been wonderful to work with. We've really enjoyed them. And Herman, I know you're going to have all kinds of great information to share with the group today. So let me ask you the question. So why the need for change? And can you give us a perspective on those needs? Is it cost reductions? Is it recruitment that's driving it and retainment? Or is it employee demographics? What all is causing this change? What's the need about?
Sure, Christy. First of all, thank to you and the NASCA team for allowing me to be here today. It's great to be here. And, just for a little background, thinking about us as a private sector participant here, why are we here? Because what we are doing every day is we're looking around saying, how do we reimagine creating space for people to do what? Live, work, play, and learn. That's really what it's about. So we take a very strategic view toward that. And from the corporate perspective now, and both Hope and Franklin and you have touched on it in somewhat, but the big buzzword in the corporate world right now is ESG, right? Environmental, all the things that we're doing to reduce the carbon footprint, social, to include the social governance, social equity issues, and governance. And governance is how are we making decisions? How are people held accountable for those decisions? And I know you guys work in a political environment, which puts even another layer on that, but truth to numbers, right? Math doesn't lie. And what you and your teams are doing is getting the right information to go out. So and the diversity inclusion, we'll talk a little about that in just a second. But really what it comes down to, Christy, I think it comes down, and Franklin covered part of it. I simplify in saying it comes down to the 3 C's. Cost, right, which every state is concerned about right now. Collaboration, we still need to know sure, how does innovation happen? Innovation I call is peanut butter and jelly. So you've got to have that collaboration, and people have to have an opportunity to be together. And then the last C is the culture, which is so important. And what's happening in the corporate world, believe it or not, Franklin also touched on this to an extent. A lot of organizations are, I shouldn't say a lot, some organizations are combining personnel along with real estate because they are so understanding how those two things interact together, and those decisions need to reinforce everyone. But I can tell you something, I'm fortunate to serve on quite a few Fortune 500 boards, and I'm gonna tell you, the hybrid model from the corporate perspective is here to stay. With a lot of the surveys that have been done, some people want to get back to the office, some people don't, but one of the things we do know is that people love their families, they love their dogs, but they also love a break from them. Mm-hmm. So it's seeming that the optimum conclusion is people want to have the optionality to work at home a couple of days a week and to go into the office a couple of days a week. So then the issue comes when they do come into the office, what are the things that you do to make sure that you can take care of those 3 C's, right? And we know one of your C's is going up because you've got enhanced cleanliness, you've got longer operating hours to make sure you can get people in and out in time, et cetera, et cetera. But those other 2 are so important, and that's corporate and collaboration and culture. Now, Franklin touched on one that I think is just critical, and that is, how is it now that people are not in the office? And let's think of 2 work groups that are probably impacted by this more so from a historical perspective, and that would be women. Okay, so the positive for women that we're seeing now is from all of the duties that they generally have at home, they're able to do that a little more, right? So the commute is out, they've got the kids, some of them even have home learning. The hours are such that they can kind of work when they need to work. And that is important. And you know what I've noticed from the corporate perspective anyway, and I don't know how many states are tracking this, most firms found that their productivity actually has gone up during this time period. And the reason for that is people are actually working more hours, and they're more effective when they're working those hours. But your concern needs to be, what's the long-term impact of that? And are you going to have burnout? And that's something you got to think of. So the positives for women. Let's think about the negatives, however. The negatives I want to think of for both women and diverse employees, whether it be by ethnicity, LGBTQ, whatever. You're missing out on that human interaction. You're missing out on running into people at the coffee pot and the water fountain and having lunch, because what happens, those personal bonds is where the connections are made that results in what? Promotions, advancements, project opportunities to do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very important that we get that done. So we've got to just make sure that we create an environment that we don't have something where we have some unintended consequences. Now, I'm going to make a generalization here, and I hope I don't alarm people too much. But let's say if we look historically, most policies end up being made by men. And I would say for the most part, if we looked at it generally, white men. And then stereotypically, somehow, a lot of the personnel positions end up being headed by white women. And then you've got a whole nother vast majority of the people out there where you probably end up with some unintended consequences. And I'm going to be interested to hear Franklin's response to this, because you have people with, their experiences and their views, and they make their policies, their decisions based upon their experiences and their views. And you end up not having a very, very important perspective as you go to not only make that policy, but implement those policies. And I think it's so important as we think about the C, which of all of these, the cost is important, but the culture one is probably the most important around. So look, the future is bright. However, I think managers, organizations, NASCA members, NASPA, you've got to think about how are we doing to lift all boats to make sure the culture is there and make sure, from my military background, that we leave no man or woman behind.
Those are great points, really great points, Herman, because that's something we've made some culture changes in this department in the recent years, and that's what bothers me is how do we keep the culture together, the good culture that we've created? How do we continue to drive it in this atmosphere, and how do we continue to do that when we all return to work and that return looks different than it has in the past, and you don't have those organic interactions like what you talked about? But I love your 3 C's. I wrote those down. Those are good. All right, so this is a question for all of you. How can space reconnect people to deliver a memorable moment, celebration, collaboration? I think we've all been talking lately about how the office is almost going to become more of a social hub. How do you retain that good work culture? And is there a correlation between space and workplace productivity, satisfaction, retention? I know that's a lot, and then some of you have already hit on this, but just kind of give me your thoughts on that. And you gave quite a bit there as well, Herman, already, but that really, I think that's what bothers me. This question is what bugs me. So why don't we, Franklin, you want to start back again, and then we'll go down.
Thank you. And Herman, thank you for the comments. And I was taking some intense notes, so I really appreciate the observations. And I know I want to make sure I maybe even speak to some of those in turn as I get to some of this as well, because I think you raised points that, in fact, I'm just going to make sure I kind of have my notes for the question, but I want to make sure I'm not avoiding answering the question, but also being responsive. I think that one thing, when I've reflected on the dynamic of how space fits into this conversation, and the word that I've used, and I think I like how Herman talked about culture, when I think about the threat that we have out there and the connection point, it's the inclusion element. It's where there's natural points of connection that invite inclusion. And I think that we do see threats to this more dispersed working environment, that people are on an island. While there is the benefit of being connected to, I think Herman nicely captured this, there's times it's good that you can be home to, do a task here and there, but also it's good to be away from the home sometimes. So we're definitely seeing fatigue, and I think some real behavioral health elements for this more protracted, first, the environment we're in, just the recognition of what 2020 was on so many fronts, but also being at home by yourself sometimes, maybe being on the island, not having those points of inclusion, is such an incredible threat to not just your work satisfaction, but your overall health. And so I think how we think about the workspace as facilitating those points of connection and being very intentional about that is important. And so I think we do see a desire, though. I mean, I think if maybe I'm the only one, so I'm going to speak a little bit out of my NASB role, but even in my role in the state of Washington, that there's a desire to go back to the way it was. There's fear of moving forward. And so I think there's really a need for us to continue to push forward, to think about how we can create more open collaboration spaces. I don't want to replicate what Hope's already said. I think she nicely captured some of that. So I'll be stopped there, but I do want to maybe speak to some other things when I have a moment later on in the agenda, but I'll stop right now to give space for others.
Great, thank you, Franklin. Hope, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say that in a perverse way, having a year of this was kind of in really helpful in a way to figure out what the next normal is going to look like. Because after 1 month, people had one sense of how they wanted to work. After 6 months, people had another sense. And I think there's just this whole getting to some sort of new equilibrium. I think was this is not a good. You wouldn't advise that this is the way you have find your way to this, but since we found our way into this, it's kind of been helpful. We've had a year to kind of absorb and recalibrate and so on. So I think it's also been as a bit of a generational issue as well in terms of how to create the culture and just what people want to do, who wants to be in the office, who doesn't, and I think when you're on the younger side of your career and you want to see and be seen and create those connections so you can kind of advance, there's a sense that being in the office and having those, in-person contacts is going to help you move along. I think a lot of people want to come back for that reason, to create and be part of creating the culture. I think you're going to find that some of the people on the older end of the spectrum are going to say, I don't want to deal with the commute. And then there's like a whole different sense of where they are in their lives. So I think it's going to be very hard to kind of create the balance. The only thing I'll add, that's something we've thought about in our agency in Massachusetts, is as we create our new unaddressable work areas, we're going to create neighborhoods, intentional areas where like this group can locate themselves here. Notwithstanding that, we also will have a reservation system. So if you're coming in and you're in, work group A, and your project happens to be really closely aligned with work group B, you can reserve a space next to that person in work group B. So there's some of that stuff is going to need to be help facilitate some of that interconnectedness.
Well,
Yeah,
Christy,
thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I would add to that. I would challenge you all. Instead of thinking about a workplace, think about a workspace. Because what is going to happen, the digitalization of the world, it is happening. So what you have to do is understand this digital transformation and understand, how do we arm our employees to accomplish their mission, so that we can also do the following things: help them be authentic, help them be innovative. And when people are authentic, innovative, and working together, they can do it. So sure, in the past, that's been, we've got to be in a place, co-located to do that. We've got to think about it now in terms of space. So how do you create the space that you can get that collaboration, to get the innovation that is needed to be? And part of that is going to be, some things, as we said, are just gonna go back. I'm on the board of the American Red Cross, and I spent 4 hours this morning. I'm a governor there. We spent 4.5 hours on our board meeting this morning, and we made the decision, even going forward, where we used to have 4 meetings in person a year. We made the decision, we're going to have 2 meetings. We're optimistic that COVID is going to be over, and I think we all ought to be for that. We're going to have 2 in person, and we're going to have 2 digitally. And we're forever getting the feedback loop. How do we make the digitalization, the virtual meetings, more effective to get the things done that you need to get done? And again, we cut down on carbon. The vice president for Apple is not flying to Washington, right? So the carbon footprint is reduced. I'm not driving downtown. So there's certainly some positive to that. But the biggest thing is, start thinking about workspace, not workplace.
Okay, so since we're on that, tell us, what do you think the future is going to look like for office furniture? How do we, we're going to have space changes and lockers, and are we going to have good AV? What's the technology going to be? So give us some details there.
Yeah, well, Chrissy, I worked with you and your 2 predecessors. And it's so funny, when the state first, I see Ann McGarren's on the call, when we first came out with this changing everything in Tennessee, the state had named it real estate densification. And we said, that's our objective, but that shouldn't be our title. That's not going to go. And they changed it to Transforming Tennessee for Tomorrow, TTT, which was a great win there. So if you think of that. So what did we do? We went from a situation where the metric was always what? How many people per square foot? And us advisors, and I'm certain there's some others out there listening, our goal was to say, how can we do it? We can cut out in these cubes, we can do this, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing that's happened from a generational aspect, you guys probably on here aren't old enough, but in the old days for me, boy, the saddest symbol was having an office, right? You wanted that corner office because that was part of your psychic income. Let me tell you, this new generation, they don't care. They could care less about having an office because they are collaborative. And for me, I noted it when my kids were in high school, and in the old days, you went on a date with a boy and a girl. They did dates. What do? It's just a group of people, and they go out and do things. And that's kind of their psychic. So we've got to think about that generation that you're hiring and you're bringing them in. So from that perspective, I think kind of the whole idea of having offices, and we know that does increase the per square foot, is going to take away the need. However, the fact that we need the social distancing is going to happen. Some of the things that people are doing is obviously alternating what days people come in, right? 2 in, 2 off, leaving a day, one company, leaving a day on Friday, believe it or not, let everybody stay home. And that's the cleaning day. And then over the weekend, everything gets to, air out again. So that's one thing. Another opportunity is to do what? Split shifts. So, the 8 to 5, Dolly Parton, 8 to 4, whatever it is, that's history. So have some people come in at 6 and they leave at 12:30. The others come in at 12:30 and they leave at 6:30. So you've got the commute is different and everything is different. Somebody asked already about, what software are you using to schedule the rooms and everything. So I always promise NASCA that I don't market on here, but I will say that we are doing something called JET, JLL JET. And it takes into account, a whole bunch of things from desk booking, broadcast notifications, right? Getting information out quickly, connecting colleagues, because that's what the culture is all about. Calendar reminders, et cetera, scheduling meetings, scheduling repair requests. So right now you go to 5 different places or 10 different places to get all these things done. Think about your employees having that one app on their phone that they can get all of these things done, and it's tied into your work order systems, tied into your CAD, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all I'm going to say there about that. So Chrissy, those are things. So the furniture, this idea, sometimes you got the little cube and you push 3 people in there. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So you're going to have to do some of these alternative ways, either by size or by timing, to get people in at different times. But I do think it's very, very important. Now we know that, Facebook, some of the large companies are saying, you work wherever you want to work forever. And we know IBM did that, 5 years ago? And the previous CEO came in and said, everybody come back, because it impacted that 3rd C for Jeannie Romney at IBM, and that's the C. She saw something eroding in the C. So I think with that, Chrissy, it's going to end up being a hybrid, and it's important for all of you leaders out there to create the space where people can communicate, collaborate, and be innovative on a consistent basis. And by the way, the old 8 to 5 gone away, right? People are working 24/7. I wake up in the middle of the night sometime and I just sit there and take care of some things and then go back to sleep. And we know other people are, some of you are doing the same thing.
Right. So being from Tennessee, I have to correct you on that. It's Dolly's 9 to 5. So and you talked about that tension that is there and going to be in the office space, because we want to have these shared collaborative kind of spaces, but then you also have to think about the world we're in, and that was the same kind of tension that Franklin was talking about earlier. So anyway, Hope, how do you see the space supporting customer service in the future? With things like a digital waiting room or less space in the waiting room because of less in-person visits. I know here in the state of Tennessee, DHS has changed to making appointments so that we don't even have these big waiting rooms anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're trying to minimize the amount of people coming through our building during, where they can do whatever they can online. So that's item number 1, moving a lot of things that used to be done, people that felt they had to do in person, and creating more online opportunities for people to get their work done. That's not really our physical work, that's really the other agencies and their business processes. But definitely a reservation system for people to use the space that is available to them. So we can, in this sort of vaccine implementation phase, to have the social distancing and have spacing sort of done in one way. When we get through vaccines and hopefully we're back into a more so-called normal approach, then we are thinking we could use the reservation system and fill in more as needed. I mentioned this earlier, but the whole idea of handling conference room reservations. I don't think that every agency is going in our multi-agency buildings are going to have their own conference room, or even in multi-tenant buildings where we have a master lease. We're going to have some shared spaces and have a way to manage that and have people reserve and utilize that as appropriate. The other thing that's just happened, and I don't know if this is really as germane as this conversation, but we've been able to, through the emergencies that have been declared, states of emergencies, to move a lot of public meetings to online meetings. And, it's made it really, in my opinion, much more accessible for people to attend and to participate in certain public processes instead of having to, go to a late night meeting in some city they're not familiar with. They can log in and participate. So I think there's something to be said about just using the technological advantages to our best benefit to include and to promote inclusion and participation in government services. So those are some of the issues. I have to say one more thing, which is it was really part of I think the question for Herman, but lockers has become one of the biggest points of contention. I don't know how to solve it right now, but if people are not going to have addressable spaces, but they want to have their coffee cup, they don't want to carry their coffee cup back and forth, or their sneakers or whatever. We have to kind of come up with a solution for that. We don't have the solution yet, but it's the littlest things can become the most sticky.
So I'm having a computer problem. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see anything, but I can hear you guys. So thank you for those points. So we talked about customer service there. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Franklin?
No, just to build off of some of the things that Hope nicely covered, I do want to also share the impact that I think remote opportunities for engagement with our workforce and with the public has been incredibly increased. I think there's been a benefit of that. I think we have to watch for technology barriers across the state and in our communities to make sure that there's equal access to broadband and technology resources for participation in those options, which is something we have to watch as in terms of good government. But it's I do notice that there's opportunities for us to think about how we can bring in other folks across the state. In fact, even some of our member states have shared in this area that I have an interest of personally, as well as how we can even think about public employment opportunities out in the remote settings as well. So where could we actually bring some good paying government jobs that have connections to impact in terms of how we serve the people who live in Washington, for example, and getting those jobs outside of Olympia, the capital, and getting those jobs onto the eastern side of the state. I think that helps government's brand in some ways. And so I think that, and our jobs can change communities. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. I wanted just to amplify that. Also, just to speak to Herman's observation, I want to make sure I did speak this. I want to respect our time, of course, but I really just want to confirm and amplify the importance of how we think about our policies, and even as we think about return to work and those elements, including others in that process and challenging the safe implementation questions. It's absolutely true that the decision tables, the management tables for many of the decisions of what policies are made, and importantly, how policies are implemented, are not diverse tables, are not inclusive of all voices and perspectives of impacts on individuals, on human beings, if I may say it that way. So I think intentionality about how you hold space for that is important. I know one thing that we've worked on quite a bit in our state is we have a robust network of business resource groups. And these are groups that are representative of communities of our workforce, and the importance of our policies before we implement them go through those groups for review, and they're able to, we invite them to speak truth to power and challenge us on those. And so I think that's part of the equation, but of course the deeper question is how we're intentional about growing a diverse, highly qualified leadership behind us in all of the roles, all the chairs we all sit on in this call, and just want to amplify that as well. I think one other question, and Christine, I don't want to go too far off topic, but just in terms of what I think the question also is about how we are going to think about as people return to the workplace. this is probably one of the more challenging areas we have. I think that we continue to explore ways to, I think, build off of some of the great ideas that Hope has shared in terms of thinking about the use of space. But I also want to acknowledge that for those that may continue to work remotely, we have some work to do to challenge conventional ways of how government operates. We've run into quite a bit of work around things like ethics laws when it thinks about giving more employees flexibility. So there's a dynamic. If I work at Google and I go out and run a few errands at noon, or 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, no one's taking pictures and saying, why is this Google employee out running errands at the store? A state employee who maybe takes 2 o'clock to go run some errands, that could turn into, why are they not working? And so I think this is an area that we have an incredible amount of work to do to help people understand that we're working harder, doing more in this different way we're working, but it's not going to be 8 to 5 anymore, or the quote Dolly 9 to 5. And I think it's one of the bigger challenges we have of HR, and probably even other dynamics of how do we get out of this kind of safe way of thinking. But it comes with some risk, and it comes with a lot of work. So Christine, I'm going to pause and make sure I've answered the question you're intending there. I feel like I may have skirted part of that, but just building off of some of what Hope had shared. So.
Sorry, I had to drop off and come back. I was having a computer problem.
I was trying to read there, so I hope I did okay on that.
You did awesome.
Yeah, you did great.
He went on to the next question. So he already talked about bringing people back into the office. So we can jump on to the next one after that.
So, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, Herman, and we were talking about what kind of software there is to use, or what kind of app for hoteling and sharing of office space. Anybody have any other thoughts on that? What are you using? What are you thinking? I know that's an issue that's come up on our chat board within the NASCA organization. Anybody jump in there? Anybody who has any thoughts, just go for it. If you've investigated it, or you're starting to use something that you think is good, bad, effective, not effective, whatever.
I would say we're investigating. We're not all there yet. We have in Massachusetts. I'm sure that there's lots of states through the NASCA organization who are at different levels. Our enterprise technology agency is definitely rolling out executive branch reservation system. And what we're going to be doing is adding in a parking module for that too. So not just office space reservations, but parking space reservations as well. So that'll provide some more access for people to come into the building, since we're not using our garages the way we used to either, for the same reason we're not using our office space the way we need to. So, and we're updating our badging and access system while we're at it. So but I'd say we haven't really, I can't say we're any place yet to say if it's working or not working.
Christy, the only thing I would add is you as senior managers, just ask yourself for every function that you're having that's being performed, ask yourself how and when does a human need to be involved in that? So that's everything from your work order system to reserving a room, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't limit it just to the room reservations. Ask that question generally, and then it's important for you to get the digital transformation process, because what Hope's talking about, adding the parking, that's great. And I would say the old adage, measure twice and cut once. Try to have a strategic summit to think about what is the idea of the possible, and then say this is our framework. And one thing I see governments do, and I'm going to be a little positively critical, is you analyze things forever because you don't want to be wrong. And I understand the reason for that. You're in a glass bubble and you want to make sure. But if I had to, and now I spend probably 3/4 of my time working corporate and about 1/4, most of it on Tennessee accounts, and the real thing is just that ability to buck the system. And I know it's easier said than done. I'm an entrepreneur, so I just think that way. But just the analysis paralysis, it's never, let's not let perfect get in the way of good. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so that's really good advice. Think about that. That's just something that I would not have thought about that. So thank you, Herman. Thank you. All right, so Jamie, are we ready for questions in the chat, or should we? I've got one other question here I'd like to ask if not.
Yeah, the only question we've got that come in the chat that you guys haven't talked about are specific reduction targets. To any states, have you guys already set a goal? I know we've been actually talking, Herman and myself, with several states, and we've heard that there's some, really already have a goal, have a targeted goal, some just starting that journey, no specific goal yet. But would love to hear from the states on the call if you guys already have a facilities reduction goal.
Well, I can say for us, we know we have about 1 million square feet we think we're going to take out of the portfolio over the next 5 years. So, Hope, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've done a lot of data gathering for some agencies in our portfolio, and based on the type of work and the number of people doing those different types of work, whether it's confidential work or collaborative or one, single kind of person work, we've determined we could reduce our space by 50%. And so we're seeing this play out as we use the same data gathering, surveying for other agencies that seem to be kind of falling in at that level, both types of work and people's preferences. It kind of combines both. So I think we're going in that mindset, and we're doing the same thing with a lot of our leasing agencies, and it's kind of working out that way. I don't know if it may not be a one size fits all, but that's sort of where we seem to be heading.
Franklin, do you guys have a target there?
I just want to build off of what Herman shared. I think this is the example of something that I know some states are experiencing. I think I may be speaking a bit out of my zone, so if I get fired for saying this, maybe someone can be a reference on this call for me. But that's what we're seeing. I think that there's fear of giving a number because we don't know enough of everything to say the number, and we don't want to be wrong. We don't want the budget writers to say, well, 30% off. Let's go ahead and take that money and do some good things with that, and we're left without the resources people think they need. So I think the question may have been from one of my colleagues, because I think this is something we're struggling, because we have that notion of like, let's set a goal, even if we're wrong, it's something to work towards, but then we're afraid to be wrong. And I think other member states have shared this as well, of like going too far and not taking into account what reality is 2 years from now. So I'm really excited to hear the numbers. I'm going to use this to drive some conversations back home.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry. As we've been rolling out some of our state stuff, we've been referencing other states in the NASCA organization and what they're doing. So I don't think anyone is out there alone at this point on these kind of conversations. So, and there is, obviously this big economic downstream effect, because it's not just states, it's corporations, it's all these big office buildings in downtowns that are going through the same set of conversations. And there's an impact, that we have to kind of recognize as well.
Right. So no more questions, Jamie. I'm going to ask my last question. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So what is the biggest lesson that you've learned regarding real estate optimization and working in a flexible world up until this point in time, realizing that things are changing moment to moment? And I'll start with Hope.
Well, probably the easy one is that one size does not fit all. We're trying to figure all of this out. And the whole technology piece is huge to make this all work. I mean, we were lucky. Many of us had laptops already. We had started moving to some of these, in our world, we're using Microsoft and Teams, and just really, exploiting the technologies that are already out there, which maybe a lot of other states or other entities had already been using. But having all that technology set up, or the access to the technology, is really important. And I'll just add, having technology support staff, because there's people who just don't always know what they're doing. They want to do everything, but they can't even figure out how to, for good reason. It's nice to have someone you could, in the office, go down the hall and get help. And we're kind of flying solo in a lot of ways.
Right. Franklin, what about you? Biggest lesson this year?
Something you said in your question is probably the one thing. It always changes. And that what you think may have been working a couple months ago does not work anymore. And I think the biggest thing that I may not speak to real estate optimization as much as flexible work, that from an HR perspective, we have to watch for ways that we continue to make sure we're checking in on our employees from a really, and I want to amplify really a wellness perspective. I think that we have the behavioral health element of our workforce is something that I think is an opportunity that it's part of a conversation we can have now. I think talking about mental wellness and behavioral health is something that we never talked about before as much as openly. I think we have a moment with what's happening right now to have that conversation. And there's been so many points over the past year where I think we've had those moments. We realize we have to see people as people and be there for them. And perhaps in the hardest times where we can't be there physically. But this is an opportunity for us to think and talk about that. And so I think that's a huge lesson I've taken personally, and I think many of our member states have shared as well. I think I'll leave it with that because I want to make sure Herman has a chance to share as well, because I've learned so much from him already. So I want to yield to him.
Thank you, Franklin. You're so kind. First of all, digital transformation, right? People had plans to do things. One of our clients had hoped to have 20% work from home in 2 years, and they got it done in 2 months. So 2 weeks, I'm sorry. So that digital transformation. So from that point, you also say, in which we ought to bring to our management all the time, agility. Let's teach our teams agility. Now, I'm a military guy. And one of the things that we were taught, I'm an old military guy. So the Soviets teach their soldiers, you do A, B, C, and D. So it's rote. No matter what happened, they don't have to think, they just do. The American soldier is taught another way. The American soldier is taught to review the situation, think, and then react. And those are two fundamentally different ways to train people. And I'm a believer that if you can empower people to think, Christy, you've got a big operation down there, but there's somebody over in East Tennessee right now making a decision that's going to impact your process by the end of the year. So how do we empower people? And I think this process of distributed work and that agility is important. And the last thing, two things that I think go together, cost is important. And people generally, that's the first thing they look at is the cost. But you really got to think about the service level, which impacts the culture, which goes back to make the creativity, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big circle. So those are the things I say. I think the digitization, I think I've learned. The others have always been on my mind, and they've just been confirmed to be important during this period.
Wow, great. This has just been a really, really great session. Thank you all so much for participating. I've got to go back and listen to it so I can really understand it and take all this in, because this has just been very, very valuable to me, and I certainly hope it has been to everyone else. I apologize for my technical issues. I think they're all working now. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but appreciate everyone and being here and participating. And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to say the final few words.
Yeah, thank you so much to our NASCA Vice President, Christy Branscombe in Tennessee. Thank you to Hope and the NASCA, your association. Thank you to Franklin and NASCA, your association. The strategic partners is really to help hear from your associations. Our group wanted to hear what's going on in facilities and hear what's going on with HR. As we heard today, there's just so much collaboration. There's so much that are related, and that's what was so great. So much to learn today. We talked about stronger connections. We talked about ESG from Herman, kind of talking about that environmental, social, and governance. We also got the 3 C's. We got lots of acronyms today: the cost, collaboration, culture. So much to learn. Also, we're really helpful. This will help elevate some future research we have coming out. This is just the beginning of the conversation on optimizing real estate. NASCA is doing a lot of research around this. As some states are kind of leading the forefront and some are just starting this discussion, we'll come out with more of this in May. So with that, we hope you guys will join us for our next NASCA Top 10 NASCA TV on April 14th. And with that, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. So great to see our NASCA members.